Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So many times I get asked the question, is now a good time to build a house? So for those of you who don't know, I work at a lumber yard. I do retail sales for a living. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I know people who work at the mills. I know truck drivers. I know loggers. I know other distributors. I know the customers that are out there. There's really no part of this industry that I am not familiar with. And when I'm asked the question, is now a good time to build a house, I really have to think, what is it that you plan on doing with this home? I mean, is this the home that you plan on living in forever? Or is this something that you plan on using to rent out for like rental income? Is it something that you plan on selling once you're done building it? There's a lot of reasons on why it is that you would want to build a home. So when I'm asked the question, is now a good time to build a home? Generally, I'm guessing most people want to know if the building materials are going to be going up or down from here. And now this is going to be a very difficult question to answer because there's so many different components when it comes to building a home. And now when it comes to these different components that put a house together, there's really the main one that you're looking at that is really the same for all homes no matter what you do, and that's the framing portion of it. So like the skeleton of the building and then the skin that goes on it. So you have the framing and the sheathing. And now these two particular products are what you would consider the framing material. Everything else after that is siding or doors or windows or roofing or, the appliances or some kind of other, piece to the house. But the actual structure itself, it would be considered the framing package. And now these framing packages have come down dramatically. Just to kind of give you an idea, a 2x4/8 standard and better used to sell for $13.50 at the height of the pandemic. And when I say it used to sell for that, I use that very loosely. Not a lot was selling at $13.50. Typically, this board would sell for around $2.50 to say $3.50, and even prior to the pandemic, we were selling those boards upwards of $4 a piece when lumber was running up to $6.50 per thousand. Again, that was prior to the pandemic. So right now, we have 2x4 selling for right around $4 a piece, and this would be pretty typical, I would imagine, if you look across the nation. A sheet of plywood had been selling for $80 a sheet. This is unheard of. This is at the height of the pandemic when building materials were at their most expensive. A sheet of half-inch CDX 5-ply, excuse me, was selling for over $80 a sheet. Now, typically, this particular piece of building material would sell for, say, $18 to $22 a sheet. Right now, we have it at $29 a sheet. It didn't quite match the same as lumber did as far as like a 2x4 goes, as and the price coming back down to what would be considered like normal. But there's still a shortage of another product out there called OSB, which is the cheaper version of CDX. It's used in the exact same fashion, but again, it's a cheaper version. It's a little more water sensitive, so we don't use it as much in the Pacific Northwest, although it is a very popular product up here and we do use it quite frequently. The half-inch CDX is a much more durable and preferred product when it comes to that sheathing purpose. So OSB isn't nearly as popular up here, but still, because of the demand for this OSB is elevated and the production of it has been reduced, that has put pressure onto the half-inch CDX, which you can then see the reason why the stuff is selling for $29 a sheet today as opposed to, say, under $25 a sheet. Now, that's like the typical like framing stuff. People say, yeah, well, that's this part of the the cost of the house. What about all the rest of the stuff? And yes, all these other items have gone up quite a bit. I mean, they're elevated significantly. We used to sell like, things like fiber cement siding, right? The price of this had dramatically moved up. I mean, we were selling it for, say, $8 for a 12-foot stick of this stuff, and it had moved all the way up to close to $14, $15 a piece for each one of these pieces of siding, which was just ridiculous. People were shaking their heads at it. We have now reduced this, not back down to the $9, $8 a piece or anything like that. It's still up around $10 to $11 a piece. However, it's a different product. Something new has come in, right? It's not the same as it used to be, and you can tell even by looking at it, it's not quite what the product used to be, even though they say, yeah, it's the same, it's not. right? And so now a new product has come in and it's replaced the old stuff with a newer price. It has a new name, a new label, and it doesn't get noticed in the deflationary scenario like lumber would, because lumber's a fixed item. It doesn't have a label to it. I mean, there is labels from the different mills, but generally speaking, it's, a 2x4 here is a 2x4, anywhere. It's a fungible item, right? And so when you look at like things like siding, well, it has a particular name and a particular brand. And so if they just eliminate that name and brand, they can bring in a cheaper version and give it a new name and a new label and a lower price, and you don't necessarily recognize it as a deflationary scenario. Now, if you look at something right now, I just went and got the price for Cedar shingles. This is a really interesting one. Cedar shingles have really jumped around in price, but they have dropped significantly, like dramatically have come down. So at the height of the cedar shingle prices, we were selling a single bundle of cedar shingles. Typically would cover around 25 square feet of space, right? If you have that on a 7-inch exposure, people who are familiar with building, they understand all that. Not important. But a single bundle of this would sell for about $194, right? And this is at the height. And this price was like for a long time. I mean, it went on for well over a year at $194. Now, at its low, right, the lowest price I had sold this for over the last, I think I went back and looked over like the course of 6 years. The lowest price that I had sold this stuff for was $70.39. Now, this was in May of 2020. This was right when the pandemic was kicking in and all building had pretty much come to an end. The price of this stuff had pretty much collapsed. $70.39. Now, comparing that to November of 2019, so this would be just before the pandemic kicked in, it was at $82, $81.88. So that makes sense, right? It was, at $82 right before the pandemic. The pandemic kicked in, building came to a halt. All building supplies kind of fell in price. I mean, not kind of, they all fell in price. And those cedar shingles, right as the pandemic kicked in, dropped all the way down to $70.39. Now, January of 2021, that bundle of shingles was selling for $75.88. All right? So there's not a whole lot of room going on here between 2019, November of 2019, all the way to January of 2021, right? I mean, the move was like $10, right? So not a lot of fluctuation happening there. But get this, then it really starts to kick in. By August, right, of 2021, that bundle of shingles had moved all the way up to $100. Right? Then by December of 2021, it was at 110. So it went from early January 2021, at the beginning of the year, it was at $75.88. By the middle of the year, about summertime, in August, it had gone up to $100, and by the end of the year, it was at 110. This was over the course of 2021. Right. Then, by February of 2023, it had moved all the way up to the $194 where it had peaked out, right, at that price. And now today, we have it at $109.99, the same price that we had back in December of 2021. I can only assume that if there is a slowdown in the building industry due to, all the uncertainty that's happening out there and the elevated interest rates and people not really interested in building a home right now, with the idea that there might be a home build or a home crash, why would the builder want to do that? It only leads me to believe that the pressure on home or on building material prices is going to continue to come down. However, that may not necessarily be the case. Right? This is something that we had discussed yesterday. I just want to make sure that we, take in both sides of it, because what it's showing here in cedar shingles is that there's not a lot of demand for them going on right now, which would lead me to believe that there's not a lot of homes being built. Right? So now, when we think about these conditions that are happening out here, and people ask me, is now a good time to build a home? I would certainly think that now is a good time to get into the lumber. And it certainly seems that now is a good time to maybe buy the cedar shingles if you're going to side it with that. So stocking up on some of these materials might not be a bad idea, as these parts of the industry start to find their ways down, but may not necessarily stay there. As we learned from lumber yesterday, there could be a shortage of lumber coming into the future, and we noticed that from the lack of available pressure treated coming out of the pressure treated market. So we did a report on that yesterday. If you didn't see that video, we were talking about pressure treated decking and how there's a short supply of that, now coming into the yard, which was something that I had noticed prior to the major run up in prices of lumber. So we could see that the lumber future prices, and definitely keep an eye on it, as we start moving into summer, which is typically the framing season, we could see lumber prices moving up, and you may miss out on an opportunity to pick up lumber at a better price. I can't see lumber going down from here. So, when people ask me, is now a good time to build a house? I don't know if it's necessarily a good time to build the entire house, but it's certainly a good time to pick up on the framing lumber before it's too late. And cedar shingles have really just dropped dramatically. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.